Hello, beautiful people. How's everyone doing today? Justice, thank you for being here for another episode of Plugged In from YAA Electric.
Thank you for having me, as always. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I'm going to see you like Thursday. I don't think I'm going to see you tomorrow, but yeah, this is exciting. The YAA Electric team is going to be together in person in Maryland. Looking forward to that. Maybe we'll even have a special episode live in the same studio. That would be special.
That would be fun. I would like that.
Thank you, viewers who are with us live in the chat this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Dwayne, Learning Fast. Kimberly's with us. Kimberly, thank you for being here. It means so much to us. John, Value Analyst. Cool name. Yeah, thank you for being here. Today, we're going to be starting out the show by talking about Toyota, kind of expanding upon their strategy to double down on hybrids and how I've kind of been warming up to what they're doing. Basically, the more I learn about battery shortages. Justice, maybe we'll debate, maybe you'll agree with me, I don't know. But before we get into that, what EV news has been on your mind lately, or anything you've seen on the streets, perhaps?
Yeah. So, the two big ones that come out to me is Tennessee's pushing to triple their EV fee
Okay.
from $100 to $300 for owning an EV that you
Wow.
pay a year. Um, that is, that makes sense to me, actually. So, Um, it sounds outrageous, but when you think about that, most states, including here in California, that roads are maintained and infrastructure is maintained through tax on gasoline, then those driving EVs, of course, haven't been paying into that, and but they're using the roads, so it makes sense. I never thought $100 was quite enough to make up for what you're paying in gas tax every year in your ICE vehicle. So while it sounds outrageous at first to triple it to $300, it actually kind of makes sense if you figure out what you would be paying in gas taxes every year on your ICE vehicle.
Yeah, I could see that. I pay $200 a year to make up for the lack of gas taxes here in West Virginia. Um, yeah, it's just something I have to plan for when it comes that time of year. But interesting news. Thank you for sharing that. And I've got some Ford news I want to share with everyone. But first, PMD, thank you for being here. Thoughts on the Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid? I would say if you're deciding between the Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid and a Subaru Solterra, go with the Crosstrek Hybrid. I'm a fan of hybrids. That's basically what today's show is about. So we're going to be talking, getting deep into the details of the hybrid world and why that's not going anywhere anytime soon. I love the Crosstrek Hybrid because it has standard all-wheel drive. You don't have to worry about where you're going to stop and charge, and you can still get much better fuel economy than the standard Crosstrek. So I like it. If you can find it at MSRP or below, I would not pay a markup on a Crosstrek hybrid, right, Justice?
No markups on any Subarus, please. I know there's actually a growing market of Subaru dealers who are starting to add markups. Oddly enough, they're starting to do it now. They haven't done it through most of the pandemic, but now they're starting to. Too many good Subaru dealers out there on any of the models to pay markup, so don't do that.
Yeah, and there's also an all-electric driving range with at least one variant of the 2023 Crosstrek hybrid that would give you 17 miles of all-electric driving. So that would be pretty cool. Otherwise, 35 miles per gallon combined in hybrid mode. That's quite a bit better than what the standard Crosstrek would get. And yeah, this kind of leads right into what Toyota's executives have been saying about their strategy. Uh, yeah, I'll save my Ford news for later. It's a bit of a teaser, but yeah, Ford getting into the charging world and might be a serious player in the charging space pretty soon. That's the teaser, okay? But yeah, let's dive in. Let me go ahead and pull up this special article from Bloomberg. Let's see. Nah, I can't pull it up right now, but I'm going to talk about it. All right, so Toyota has been going deeper into the realm of sticking to its guns on hybrid powertrains. Now, this is important because, Justice, you want to remind our viewers and listeners what went on with Toyota's first EV rollout in the past year?
Well, they tried to make it really easy for you to drive it until the wheels fell off. Um, so, yeah, they had a little bit of problems rolling out their first not very good EV. Beyond the wheels falling off, it its stats didn't really make a lot of sense. So it's more of a compliance EV. I know they're supposedly rethinking their strategy, but they seem to be going full bore on the hybrids still.
Yep, totally. And they have just unveiled the new redesigned Prius. And I think they're using the momentum of basically everyone just tossing praise onto the 2023 Prius to really just expand upon what they've said in the past, which is that hybrids are not going away anytime soon. Now, what I find particularly interesting about the comments that we're about to talk about is that they really expand on the environmental premise for why they're doing what they're doing. And it speaks to me. I think you cannot deny what Toyota's chief battery sourcing engineer or something like that said. So I will get that pulled up here in a second. But it is really, really fascinating. I'm going to start out with a quote. Okay. Toyota's chief scientist, Gil Pratt, said, quote, when battery materials and renewable energy charging infrastructure are scarce, which is what they're going to be for the next 10 to 15 years, we need to employ systems thinking. Battery cells should be put where they will do the most good. Yeah, I this resonates a lot with me. It it wouldn't have been so convincing to me like a year ago, but Justice, as you and I have been doing this show, I've learned a lot about just the nonsense and the over expectations that are kind of being thrown around with regards to how quickly we can ramp up battery supply chains. It's going to happen, but it's not going to happen by 2025 or 2027. I mean, we'll be lucky if we're getting to where we need to be in 2030. So
Yep.
I wonder how much you agree with me on that first take, Justice. Like, I think Toyota is the most realistic of all automakers right now. Um, what do you think? Like, what were your first thoughts whenever you saw that Toyota's doubling down on hybrids?
Well, so I agree with you in that it makes the most sense that we're pushing artificial timelines that just aren't realistic.
Hmm.
I think I've said that for a while now too.
Yep.
I like free competition. I think people should be choosing to drive an EV and not feel like they're being forced into it. I think markets take a while to come around, but people come around and it needs to happen naturally. And I think the expectation that the future is here and it's here now is somewhat unrealistic. Not somewhat, it's very unrealistic. One of the other stories I have to share sort of fits into this too. And I agree in that point that a hybrid sort of bridges that gap and makes the most sense right away.
Yep. Totally agree. Um, Also, for me, thinking about how big of a behemoth Toyota is. They go between number one and number two automaker by volume in America. But think about their global impact. That's where I was really getting deep into this, is thinking about Toyota's global impact, North America aside. Um, they, as such a massive automaker in Asia, even in Latin America, Africa's emerging auto market, they could have a huge environmental impact, which is something I unapologetically care about, um, by getting hybrid powertrains into more of the vehicles in parts of the emerging economies of the world. Things like that were really brought up by Toyota's chief scientist. Now, when let's see, Gil Pratt, the chief scientist, was going on to basically defend their plans to keep hybrid powertrains as core to their strategy for the next decade or more. He went on to provide an example that just it's going to stick with me for a long time. And I think, Justice, you're going to get tired of me bringing this up on future shows because I think it's a really good example. And it's, I would say, the greatest illustration of how my own thinking has shifted as I've learned, as I've accumulated knowledge from the experts out there and enjoyed having conversations with you, Justice, and the viewers and listeners. Yeah, my thinking has shifted. I think that's a healthy thing to do, is to be able to adapt and move on. So here's what they provided as their example. It says Pratt gave an estimate of the typical lifetime emissions of 100 non-electrified vehicles. I'll go ahead and scroll down for the viewers. They want to follow along. Don't want to listen to me read. Okay. He then gave a breakdown of how much the emissions rate of the fleet could be reduced, assuming you only have 100 kilowatt hours of battery capacity to go around. Sounds silly, but battery shortages are clearly on our doorstep. Okay, so this is a good example. Let's say that battery happens to be the same size of a Tesla Model S. Happens to be true. You've got 100 vehicles. You only have 100 kilowatt hours of batteries to distribute somehow among those 100 vehicles in the fleet. What would make the biggest difference on an from an environmental standpoint? Well, he goes on. Using the entire battery supply to fully electrify one car reduces the emissions rate of the fleet by less than 1%. Using this scarce amount of cells to replace 6 non-electrified cars with plug-in hybrids, each using 18 kilowatt hour batteries, would reduce the fleet's emissions rate by about 2.4%. But what if you turn them all into hybrids with tiny little 1.1 kilowatt hour batteries? Sorry, turning 90 out of the 100 into hybrids, you would lower the fleet's emissions by 18%. Now, this is something I think about when it comes to the vast majority of the world that is not going to be able to have DC fast chargers with 350 kilowatt outputs in the 2020s, because there are many parts of the world that don't even have reliable electricity at all for their homes yet. These are the types of differences that I think we should be talking more about on this show, and this really resonates with me. Do you think he's overselling it, Justice?
No, not at all. I mean, I think we've sort of known that. It's just whether EV batteries could be produced fast enough to help offset that. But it doesn't look like that we're getting these mines on as fast as we want to, that we're shifting. Some of the new rules in the IRA are actually hurting the EV adoption thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this makes sense. At the market we're at right now, this makes more sense for the next 3-4 years.
Yep. And as an example of how unavoidable, at least in the short term, battery shortages are going to be, on a recent episode, we talked about how Fully Charged, amazing YouTube channel, they interviewed an analyst from S&P Global Analytics, and what they found was that it's not just lithium, okay? And it's not the other trace minerals and metals that are in battery components. It's even graphite. They said starting in 2023, S&P Global sees a shortage of graphite effective immediately.
Yep.
And graphite is essential for the, I forget, is it the anode or the cathode? But I think it's the cathode, one of the two. It's an essential component in batteries, at least for most battery chemistries that are used in electric vehicles. So at different parts of the supply chain, you're going to have, on the short term, unavoidable shortages that are going to force automakers to make these kinds of decisions. Toyota seems to be a step ahead here. I'm not too worried about Tesla because, as you've often brought up, they've got established relationships with the different stakeholders in the supply chain. And so far, that has proven to work out well for Tesla. But other automakers are just getting into it, especially Toyota. They have been kind of just going as slow as they can to get into fully electrified vehicles. Could this be a winning strategy for Toyota? I think it could be, at least until we get to the 2030s. That's my hot take.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so when we talk about all this, I was just sort of leave Tesla out of it because they're sort of in their own market doing their thing. Um, we're talking about the up and coming EV automakers who are just now making switchovers or trying to grow their company and trying to figure out their resources. Tesla's been doing this longer than everybody, EV wise, and they're already established and they have long term contracts in place, and they're
Mhm.
even helping fund some of the new mines and exploratory stuff here and there. So yeah, so this is for more everybody else who's starting to get into the EV game, and yeah, there's huge challenges. We've known that there were going to be challenges. Um, I think you and I are just understanding just how great those challenges really are,
Yep.
and how unrealistic some of these time frames are, and that hybrids, while they have particular problems of themselves, um, I like them for the fuel savings, but they're simultaneously the best of both worlds and the absolute worst of both worlds. Um, you got all kinds of like more likely to catch fire than any other vehicle by a lot.
Mhm.
Um, no savings and maintenance on versus an ICE vehicle. You actually have more costs involved. So like there's trade-offs on hybrids, which is why I'm not always, the huge champion of all the hybrids. I like them, but there are some certain problems with them.
Mhm.
Um, but if we want to cut down emissions for whatever the reason we want to cut down emissions, uh, hybrid makes more sense right now than EVs going forward in 100 million unit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am still fully for electrification, but I think what we've seen, what we've learned together throughout this experience on the podcast is that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different supply chain kinks that have to be worked out before what we say is going to happen, like fully electric by 2035. That kind of stuff, before that happens, a lot has to be done. Whether it's taking a look at the charging infrastructure, I'm not talking about like in the middle of Peru or I don't know, Bolivia. I guess South America's on my mind today. But I'm not talking about like in the developing world. I'm talking here in the US. A lot has to happen before we get anywhere close to the goals that have been stated. So, very, very interesting stuff today. And I pulled up a picture of the 2023 Prius. It is getting a small bump in efficiency, but it looks a whole lot better than any other Prius has, at least in my opinion. Um, I would say it still looks like a Prius, but it looks a whole lot better. Uh,
It does. It's a much, I've never been a fan of the Prius. Yes, I sold Toyotas. I love Toyotas. Was never a fan of the Prius. I like this one much more than the previous styles.
I test drove one time and I did not like it. It felt like a washing machine to me, and I don't know. Couldn't see myself buying one after test driving one, but maybe this would be a whole different ball game.
I
Pretty
will
cool.
tell you this: when I was on the lot and I was driving, the few times I got into Priuses, the biggest compliment I had was the inside is enormously large compared to what it looks like on the outside. Like I sat in there and I felt like, oh man, there's so much space. So I gave them that. That was about all I could say design wise for them.
Mhm.
Obviously, efficiency they have they have it all over everybody else. But speaking of this timeline, by the way, and we're talking about Tesla, and they're sort of ahead of everybody else in the supply chains. Lest we forget, Tesla, or at least Elon Musk, has a time frame problem himself.
Yeah.
Um, they really have never hit the mark on when they've released things. So the Cybertruck's 3 years late, um, at least. The semis 3 years late. They're always late with when they finally release, which to me is fine. They got to get it right. So that's like I don't mind that, but let's keep that in mind when the government starts talking about timelines and everyone else on the what their plans for the future are. The people who do this professionally for a living can't hit their timelines. There's just there's just no way we hit these goals.
Yeah, is any educated guess on what the battery capacity of the Cybertruck might end up being, and I think that would be one of the major reasons they've been kicking the Cybertruck down the road as long as
Yep.
they can, because they need to use their batteries for the Model Y, etc. What do you think the capacity would be? Is it going to be what we see in the
But
Hummer?
it's gonna do the megawatt charging, so it's got to be big.
Yeah.
It's gonna be big to have to say that it needs to be able to charge that fast with that much power. It's got to be a huge pack.
Yeah, I'm gonna think based on what we've seen with the Hummer, the size of the Hummer's battery pack, I would think there'd be a 250 kilowatt hour battery pack in the Cybertruck. Um, yeah, so fascinating. And now that the Tesla Semi is beginning deliveries, that has a just ginormous battery pack. I'm trying to remember, what is it? Looking it up right now. It is roughly 900 kilowatt hour battery pack in the Tesla Semi. Almost a megawatt battery pack. That is huge, but you need it to haul around that kind of weight and
Well,
lack of
yeah,
aerodynamic design. I mean, they did their best with the aerodynamic design for a semi, but you know, can't run from physics.
yeah. I mean, it's and the weight of that on top of it. It's
Yep,
funny because you need a bigger battery pack to support the weight of the battery pack.
yep, yep, indeed. So here's one of two Ford stories that I wanted to bring up. Ford is trying to make it easier for municipalities to buy F 150 Lightning Pros as electric police trucks. I think this is pretty cool because if you think about all of the idle time that police vehicles are sitting around, they're burning a lot of gas. It's about emissions, but it's also about saving money for the city's budget, right? If you're burning fuel all day sitting around waiting for a call. Um, yeah, I think this is a good idea as long as Ford can guarantee the supply of the truck at sticker price without a single markup. Maybe even be nice for it and offer a discount to those who are serving our communities. That would be cool. Um,
Well,
yeah,
these are government sales, right? So they should be fleet
they would be
pricing.
regulated as okay, fleet
Yeah,
pricing.
they
Man,
should be fleet pricing if they're being sold to government, so police departments.
yeah. Here's how they've rigged one for an F-150 Lightning Pro for a police department. Very interesting. I wonder if they've
Where's the
delivered.
shotgun?
Good point. I
And
wonder
I
if
don't
they've.
see any place for their belts to go. That looks really narrow there.
Yeah. I wonder if
Like you
they've
can't sit
delivered any
down
yet.
with your belt and holster in that seat. No way.
Let's see. Well, they say they've got flexible financing options. How nice of them. And look at this display. Justice, this is so much better than the shrimp that Ford has used to advertise in the front of the Mustang
Yeah.
Mach-E. I'd rather see this than some cold shrimp and ice.
Yes. Yeah. The shrimp doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. If you're unaware, just Google Mustang Mach-E shrimp and you will find what we're talking about. It is wild. Oh yeah, so that would be interesting. But the bigger Ford news, in my opinion, is someone who crunched the numbers. It looks like it was Electric. Their awesome content. They crunched the numbers on Ford's upcoming charging network. This is big news for anyone like me who doesn't drive a Tesla and wants as many places as possible to charge an EV. If I had the choice between like an Electrify America in a Target parking lot or pulling up to a Ford dealership to charge, I would choose Electrify America. But hey, this is cool. Ford's new EV dealer network will result in one of the largest DC fast charging networks in the country. So far, two-thirds of Ford's dealers are joining the Model E program to sell EVs. You might recall that Ford gave an ultimatum to all of their US dealerships saying, hey, you got to choose. First of all, choose if you want to sell EVs between now and 2027. And if you do want to sell EVs, pick between Ford Model E Elite and regular Ford Model E. And that basically determines how much money the dealership will have to invest in EV infrastructure, particularly providing a public facing DC fast charger that anyone could pull up to and use. And I've often quipped, man, imagine sitting in for 30 minutes waiting to charge and you have salespeople coming up to your window trying to sell you cars. That would not be cool. But hey, let's focus on the positives here. So if you've got 2/3 of Ford's US dealers agreeing to join Model E, they will have these public facing chargers. That would be 1,920 dealers. Okay. So, from a location standpoint, that would make Ford's network the largest DC fast charging network in the US. Justice, putting you on the spot. Is Ford going to kill Tesla with this charging network at their dealerships? I'm joking,
Oh,
guys. I'm joking.
yeah. Yeah. I always love the Tesla killer stuff because you know how when Chevy came out, Ford just went out of business. They don't exist anymore. Yeah, there's room for competition, guys. Um, but no, I mean, I think this is great. Ford had said originally when they were first spinning off the Model E concept that they were going to be doing all their chargers and create this huge network. And I've been waiting to see some sort of sign that they were actually doing it. So this is great. I
Mhm.
mean, if you're going to start at the dealerships, that's great. I mean, yeah, I don't want to be bombarded by salespeople either. But you know, if you're going in there and that's where you can charge, and 1,920 different dealerships. Now, of course, if they all only put one in, it may not be real helpful in your area.
Yeah, well,
But
here highlighted for us is the good news. So out of those 1,900 dealers that are going with Model E, almost 1,700 will be certified elite, which means they're going to have 2 stations.
oh, okay. Well,
That's 100% more, Justice.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's clearly you need more
Yeah.
stations than that to be viable as an actual charging destination.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
would still be nice to have them out.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, I am super excited that a dealership in my state of West Virginia is opening up a DC fast charger for public use. It's a Hyundai dealership in Charleston, West Virginia. This will be the first non-Tesla DC fast charger available for public use in my state. Can you believe it? It almost sounds like fake news, right? Like in 2022, there's a state that doesn't have any non-Tesla DC fast chargers. It's my state. It's West Virginia. So opening just a few weeks from now, I could travel northbound without any worries. There's tons of level 2 chargers which take forever, but I could travel north if I wanted to. I would just have to rely on slow level 2 charging, but that's about to change. I am pumped. Yeah, maybe Hyundai will get into the game just like Ford is planning to. Interesting, huh?
Now, I would love to see more manufacturers take on the burden and the brunt of EV charging stations,
Yeah, and they also
like
need to
Tesla did.
they need to get better at educating prospective EV buyers about what EV ownership is like too, because I've met
Yeah,
so many people at Electrify America stations who have no idea how to use their car, how to charge, what to expect with range, what to expect with charging, slower in the winter when it's cold, etc. Don't drive 80 miles per hour if you need to get your rated range, right? I mean, I met a Lucid Air driver at Electrify America who was really pissed that his range was not anywhere close to the EPA rated range. And I just casually asked, "Are you going like 70, 75?" Because I usually go about 80. It's like, well, that's why it's
yeah,
aerodynamics. Same thing happens with the gas cars, just gas stations are everywhere. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. You lose range in ICE vehicles all the time for all of this stuff. Your AC, speeding, low tire pressure. It's just that we're so used to gas stations everywhere, and we're not tracking our MPG every second that we're going everywhere, that you sort of lose track of the fact that your towing capacity is cut in half, or your range is cut in half in an ICE vehicle when towing too. Um, it's just the infrastructure's there, so you just sort of go, okay, and you move on.
Totally agree. Now, let's wrap up the show with any news that you wanted to share with us,
Yeah.
Justice.
So I got two, and neither of them are good. Sorry. I
Okay,
don't like
then
to
I'll
end.
have to finish. I'll finish with
Yeah,
something
yeah, okay.
positive.
So if you got something positive after my two, then please. Um, so the Buy America timeline is actually threatening the rollout of the government installed EV chargers everywhere,
Ah,
because the IRA is specifying that I hate saying it, the IRA. That means something different to me.
mhm.
My family's from Ireland, so it means something different. But the Inflation Reduction Act specifies that the chargers have to be built in America with American-made parts, and the labor has to be all American. And there is a huge shortage of materials and labor to build those. And if that, they're saying that if that policy stays in place, then there's no way to hit these EV charging goals, because we just don't have the materials and labor for it to all be US made and installed in by these timelines.
Yes, I suspect changes to come with
Yeah.
what has been passed in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Um, yeah, I pulled up a map right here related to what you were talking about. So these are the officially designated alternative fuel corridors designated by the U.S. Department of Transportation. In the solid green, you can see the areas that already have EV charging infrastructure, and the dotted lines show future EV charging corridors. So it's everywhere, as you can see. But Justice, that's a good point. It's going to be hard to reach these goals with some of the limitations we've essentially put on ourselves in a what is there's no beating around it. It's essentially a global economy, and so much of what we need to accomplish these goals is going to be easier to find elsewhere. But hopefully, we can get U.S. manufacturing up and going. That stuff takes time, though.
Yeah. It
Look at
takes
Florida.
time to hit those. Yeah. It takes time to hit all these goals. And I think that we're pushing a little faster uh, than we can. So either we remove the made in the USA component, which the Inflation Reduction Act is really a American Manufacturing Act. Whether you like it or not, that's really what this bill is. Um, so I don't see that changing. I just see the timeline having to be moved.
Yep. Yep, and we're about to dive into your next story, but this is interesting. I have not
Yep.
seen this myself, but Learning Fast in the chat says Kia EV6 production and sales have plummeted since they lost the tax credits. I believe it. Less than 500 sold in November. If I recall correctly, typically it was more like between 700 and 1200 sold per month. So it's not a massive drop, but it's still a drop. I wonder how
Yep.
much of that is because of tax credits. Probably quite a bit. I'm not quite sure if Kia has been able to climb out of the battery supply shortages that they had been dealing with. Um, Hyundai Motor Group overall, because the Ioniq 5 is very hard to get for those reasons too. And it's my understanding that they like to prioritize shipments to Europe over the US. So Europe
Yep.
gets more of those EV6s and Ioniq 5s and Genesis EVs than we do. But thanks for sharing that, Learning Fast. So what's the other bad news you want to share with us today?
All right. So you know how I hate to give never EVers a lot of ammunition, because they just look for stuff to support their point and this and that. And most of the time, I can look at news stories and go, "Yeah, you're missing this or that," and it seems kind of pointed. I have none of that here. I have absolutely nothing. This is just horrible news, and it's going to give a lot of ammunition to people who hate EVs, but it's real, and we can't deny it, and I'm not going to ignore it. So, Switzerland is saying that they may, in the winter months when prices of utilities are sky high and they have very little electricity, they may be banning the use of your EV for non-essential travel. So unless you're going to work or a medical emergency, you can't drive your EV. Now you just can't charge it at a fast charger. Nope, you can't drive it out on the road because their shortage of electricity is so great. Um, so, for someone who lives in California with rolling brownouts and blackouts every year, I extrapolate this to a California summer. and go, oh, so could this possibly be in the California future where they say, not just, no, you can't charge your vehicle between these times, but hey, if you're driving an electric vehicle, we just can't even have that on the road during these times.
Yep. Now
And
I dug it.
I've no way to spend that.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Now
Yeah.
I was surprised to learn that this is indirectly because of the war in Ukraine. It's definitely associated with it, but indirectly because this is because typically Switzerland, when they have an electricity shortage, they're able to get more electricity from their neighbors to the north, Germany and
Hmm.
Austria. But because Germany and Austria are rationing their electricity because of the war in Ukraine, and let's be clear, it's because of Russia,
Hmm.
they are not able to rely on their neighbors to the north to kind of bail them out when their hydropower freezes up when it gets pretty cold. You know, it's snow, not water up in Switzerland. So um, that's interesting. Is it's a country very heavily dependent on hydropower. I knew Switzerland loved their hydropower, but I did not know that it was such a problem in the winter months. And it's looking like it's going to affect the well, let's also make sure that we point out that this is basically a worst case scenario
Yeah.
plan, but still,
Yeah.
it's scary to talk about. There's no way of denying that.
And this is a country who has 40% EV adoption.
Yeah.
So they're pretty high in the EV adoption. They got a lot of EVs, and so there's, you know, there's that part of it, that component too. And yeah, of course, this is worst case scenario. This isn't like, hey, every winter you can't drive your EV. This is, because they're also limiting hours of restaurants and
Hmm.
businesses, and telling businesses they can only set their thermostats as high as 68 degrees. So this is among many other things, but
Hmm.
it's a real plan and a real threat.
Yeah, it's not the first thing they would do if there was an electricity emergency. They would first go through a series of other demand restrictions.
Hmm.
But yeah, this is still pretty scary. I wonder if they would literally enforce this. What if someone has solar plus battery backup and that's how they power their EV? That's my long-term goal. Um, would they like pull them over on the street if they've got an EV? I don't know. This is just a weird dystopian possibility that
Yeah,
is so
yeah.
scary to think about.
It is absolutely worst case scenario, and we're the U.S. doesn't have quite the same problem that Switzerland does as far as energy generation and stuff, but it is out there, and it's a real news story, so it's something to look at.
Hmm. Fascinating. Yep. Well, I said I'd wrap it up with some good news.
Yeah.
It's more of like what if news, but let's do it anyways. Let's wrap this show up with some Tesla news. Now, what do you think about this, Justice? I think you're going to have a hot take. Did Tesla sneak in a reveal of a smaller two-door Cybertruck? Did they do this? Where was this revealed at? Let's see. Ah, the Peterson
So,
Museum.
oh
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't buy into that too much. Oh well.
no, no, probably yeah. I
Well,
mean, but the Peterson Museum is where what the chief engineer did his speaking. But I come on, they have all kinds of different renderings and drawings up there.
okay, I need another chance. Okay, wrapping the show up with good news. New data from the International Energy Agency shows that wind and solar, got to power those EVs with something, are set to account for over 90% of global energy expansion over the next 5 years, overtaking coal to become the largest source of global electricity by early 2025. That's a big shift. So I care a lot about where the electricity that goes into my Ionic 5 comes from. And I would love to have more wind and solar, especially if we can get more community solar, residential solar. You know, I don't want to chop down a forest in West Virginia and install solar panels, but I think there is a balance that can be struck. And from what I've seen, I'm feeling positive about a renewable energy future being central to providing electricity to our EVs. Think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it absolutely will happen, and I like, I live in California, so we obviously have a lot of that already. Hydro, I wish we would stop shutting down our nuclear power plants, but that's a whole nother topic for another time. But
Yeah.
there is a renewable future out there with with good clean energy.
And unlike our EV projections, at least when it comes to Justice and I getting kind of switching over to the Toyota side with our EV projections. It's going in the other direction with solar and wind energy growth. It says that they have increased their growth forecast by 30% over the forecast just 1 year prior. So clean energy is accelerating. EVs, it's going to be a struggle, hey, but at least clean energy is all the rage right now, and that's a good thing to be supporting. So pretty cool.
Yeah. And as I wish Tesla would get on the bi-directional bandwagon because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
going to
What's up with
help.
that?
Yeah, but look, I know because I know here in California, bi-directional EV charging would help stabilize our power. We could get rid of rolling brownouts and blackouts if EVs were bi-directional and you could pull from them at those peak times.
And
It
California
would
is
be
like the only
fantastic.
place where you actually have enough Teslas to make a difference if that was a
Yeah,
capability. Yeah.
yeah, you can make a pretty big difference. I can't go anywhere. I can't walk outside my front door without seeing a Tesla here. I see them as much as I see a Toyota. So, like, it would make a difference.
Yep. Well, thank you, Justice, so much for joining me today. I'll see you in a few days. And thank you to everyone in the chat and everyone who might be checking us out on YouTube or on the podcast. We appreciate you being here. Don't forget to check out the Electric Vehicle Forum on joinyaa.com. We've got thousands of EV interested drivers out there talking about EVs, asking us questions, chatting with the experts like Justice. And we hope to see you there. So thank you so much for being here today. And we'll see you in a few days. Thanks, Justice.
Bye, everyone.